It is easy to get carried away with the force of the stories of witchcraft and demonic possession. They are powerful, they are scary, they are gothic, they are otherworldly. But it would perhaps be anachronistic to diagnose these outbreaks as forms of hysteria or the result of expressions of mental illness. I always countenance looking at what was going on the ground. By this, I mean, how did the people of the time construe the cause of mental illness, of madness? Here, we move away from the attempts by 19th century psychiatrists to legitimate their practice and demonstrate how far they had come from the bad old days. Instead, we explore a world where mental illness, particularly melancholia, what we would call depression, is configured in entirely naturalistic terms. Indeed, for the best part of 2,000 years, all illness of both body and mind was described naturalistically. In other words, patients and the people who treated them thought that illness was the product of explainable and identifiable natural causes. It is to these explanations that we now turn as we seek to provide the background for talking about madness and its therapies in the 18th and 19th centuries. Those of you who've done body, mind and medicine can, if you so wish, skip over this module as we've dealt with the issues of holism and humorism in that subject. But for the rest of you, enjoy. The figure that we always go to when we talk about this system of thinking is Hippocrates, because we assume that he was the founder of this school of thinking. Hippocrates was radical because he argued that the vast majority of disease was a natural phenomenon. And it was a natural phenomenon that was caused by imbalance in living. And the aim of the physician was setting the balance to rights to restore health. And as I've said, this was all disease, not just physical disease, but mental disease as well. There is not a dividing line between the two. Now, the major means of restoring balance was to target this group called the non-naturals. The non-naturals were air, food, exercise, sleep, emotions, cleansing, and sexuality. And too much or too little of all of these things could, depending upon the constitution of the body, result in disease. And just as they could result in disease, re-regulating in the right way could set the body back to rights. Now, these ideas were taken up into the Roman Empire by Galen. Galen systematized this, producing copious works that survived for hundreds of years. And one of the reasons they survive is that upon the collapse of the Roman Empire and its division into the Eastern and Western Empire, we begin to see the rise of Islam. They take the old classical texts, and individuals like Avicenna, that's his Latin name, or Ibn Sina, develop them, propagate them, and create the canon of medicine, which then, when Islam comes banging up against Europe from the 12th century onwards, is passed back into a Europe that has forgotten much of this knowledge. Now, it has to be remembered that God and the devil remained potential causes of disease right the way into the early modern period, as we've seen in the case of witchcraft. But this was not overwhelming, and again I'm going to provide an illustration of this. We now turn to the system of humorism that underpins the ideas about bodies and minds in sickness and health of all of the medical practitioners that I've just mentioned, from Hippocrates through to Galen, through to Ibn Sina and beyond. In fact, the humoral view dominated medical ideas until at least the 17th century and arguably beyond. And even when it demises, medicine still retains a holistic view of how disease is caused and how it should be treated. The humoral worldview, as it developed from Hippocrates onwards, was based upon the idea that four elements combine to make everything in the body, including water, air, earth and fire. These corresponded to the four seasons, when each of those elements were in their element: water in winter, air in spring, fire for heat in summer, and earth for autumn. The four seasons could then be mapped onto four organs of production: the lungs, the liver, the gallbladder, the spleen, each of which produce four humours: phlegm, blood, yellow bile, black bile, and in turn four qualities. Combined together, these could create four personality types, four temperaments: the phlegmatic, the calm, the sanguine, the optimistic, the choleric, the impulsive and the angry, and the melancholic, the reflective and perhaps depressed. Depending on when you were born, what season you were born in, or what stage of life you happen to be in, you might experience a preponderance of one humour over another, or the natural humours within your body might come out of balance. We can see the power of this model in determining the kind of individual that you were by looking at this medieval illustration demonstrating each of the four temperaments. From the top quadrant, phlegmatic, sanguine, choleric and melancholic, each to their own temperament. Working through the implications of this, health and illness are a matter of balance, imbalance and predisposition. Health is when everything is in balance, as it should be, both the naturals, the humours, your predispositions, the time of the year, and the non-naturals. Illness then is an imbalance when these matters are thrown out of their proper order. You might be predisposed to certain conditions because of your dominant humour. The season itself might affect the humoral balance. But the critical thing is that mental disturbance, for example melancholia, is just another state of imbalance. It is a condition of both body and mind. And we can see this in the implications of the humoral model, within which the body is completely integrated into the environment. It is a fundamentally holistic way of thinking about bodies and minds in sickness and health. We can see too that character, health and illness are all constructed within this cosmology, with the body and mind integrated. Mental upset could cause physical upset, but so too the opposite. Physical upset could cause mental upset. The balance model means that the two are really indistinguishable. So given this system, how do people link the symptoms of a disease and what they think causes it with treating it? Well, as we'll see, it's a matter of trying to restore balance, and all of the treatments that were used over the course of the best part of 1,000 years were geared towards those ends. There are a number of ways that physicians sought to restore balance. They might do so through regulating the non-naturals, things like sleep and diet and exercise, or they might use therapies to counter the preponderance of a particular humour. And sometimes these ways of restoring balance could be extremely violent. Over the course of history, but by the 16th and 17th century, the methods included bleeding. One of the explanations for mania could be an excess of blood. How better to calm the system down and remove the mania than drawing blood off from the body. Cupping and blistering were also important methods. Drawing the peccant humours, the humours that were out of whack, to the surface of the body. Baths and bathing could regulate temperature, but also, by ensuring cleanliness, could maintain a general standard of health. By the 17th century, herbal medicines were becoming increasingly popular poisons, once again there might be too much of a humour whizzing around the body. What better way to get it out than poisoning the body and making the patient throw up? And then things like diet and exercise could be used, and were regarded even into the 19th century as a highly effective means of treating the body and mind in sickness and in health. So how did this work in practice, particularly when a physician, for example, faced a condition like melancholia? There is no better place to look to see how humorism and mental illness overlapped than in the case of Richard Burton and his monumental work, The Anatomy of Melancholy. And here we'll see the return of the supernatural, the scope that was given to the devil and to possession for causing forms of mental illness. Robert Burton, who, tipping his hat to the genius of the classical scientist Democritus, named himself Democritus Jr. I think that it is significant that he chose Democritus, because Democritus, after all, put forward a very materialistic view of the universe that saw the whole cosmos being constructed out of small atomic units. And Burton's approach to melancholy was very much from this naturalistic perspective. On the whole, the causes of melancholy were entirely natural. Burton was a divine, a vicar, ordained in the Church of England, as was the way with academics then. Not only was he ordained, he also happened to be a scholar at Oxford University. But his other claim to fame, and something that he was open about, was the fact that he was melancholic. He published The Anatomy of Melancholy in 1621, but right the way until his death in 1640, he kept on writing and rewriting and revising, so that many editions came out during his lifetime. Basically, the book expanded and expanded. Here we see the frontispiece looking at significant states and treatments and ideas surrounding melancholy. As much as it is a medical textbook, it was also a work of literature that combined a whole range of different fields: philosophy, astrology, natural history, all to analyse his subject, all to understand it. What better way to get a sense of the holistic body-mind condition of melancholy than combining all forms of knowledge in a broad natural philosophy? But not only did he study melancholy, he also studied his own condition. And here he started off with his place in the cosmos, working out his predispositions according to the state of the stars at his birth. But most of all, it pays to look at Burton's causes of melancholia if we're to see the balance between the natural and the supernatural in mental disturbances at the time that Burton was writing. Here we see a reproduction of Burton's view of the causes of melancholia. And we can see at the top of the list things like diet. We're looking at the non-naturals here: substance, bread, coarse and black, drink, thick, thin, sour, water, unclean, milk, oil, vinegar, wine, species, flesh. On and on and on it goes. Too much of one, not enough of another, depending upon our predisposition. Working our way down the list: air, hot, cold, tempestuous. This is right out of Hippocrates. You could not find a better illustration of the working of the non-naturals within the condition melancholia. Again, working down the list. Here we see the supernatural brought forward as a potential cause of melancholia, as from God immediately, or by second causes, or from the devil immediately, with a digression of the nature of spirits and devils, or immediately by magicians and witches. So God or the devil could instantly cause it through their power. Magicians and witches could call upon the services of God or the devil to inflict melancholia upon an individual. But look at the small size of that box and compare it the natural causes, the stars, old age, temperament, parents, so a hereditary disease, working right the way down to it actually being a sequelae of other imbalances, of other disorders. Melancholia, produced by the preponderance of black bile or a predisposition that was the result of the stars under which you were born, was one of the principal mental illnesses of Burton's period. And I suppose that it's tempting to see depression as being the immediate successor of melancholia. But in reality, because of its place within the humoral system, melancholia was so much more than just a mental disturbance. It was almost a way of life. It was certainly deeply natural, and it was most definitely a condition of both body and mind that was open to interventions both through the non-naturals but also through the medical use of treatments like bleeding. And because in this model body and mind were virtually indissoluble, the principal forms of therapy were somatic. Humoralism was so intuitive as a mode of thinking about and treating disease that it lasted for centuries. In many regards, it still makes a lot of sense today, certainly to those people who flock to alternative practitioners who peddle very similar ideas about disease and sometimes use remarkably similar therapies, including cupping. But before we turn to philosophical explanations of mental maladies, we first must look at the way the soul was configured in thinking about minds of madness. Only then will we be able to grasp the magnitude of the changes wrought first by Descartes and then by John Locke.